A few things from the last part of the last chapter, 13, I want to make sure I went over. Renaissance, that was a reawakening, a rebirth in Europe. The Renaissance were known for humanism. Now, humanism is the idea that we'll become less religious and do more thinking for ourselves. And I'm not in any way saying it's bad, because, I believe people should think for themselves. And ultimately, folk, the Renaissance led to the Reformation, and the Reformation led to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment led to the scientific revolution, and the scientific revolution was to lead to political revolutions, and ultimately lead to inventions like the telephone, the telegraph, the automobile, the internet, and the television. And all this came about because of Europeans' inquisitive mind. The Renaissance, though, was more of a looking backward than a looking forward. They began to dig up old manuscripts they'd copied hundreds of years before that were copies of Aristotle's work, of Cicero. And one monk said, let's go through all the monasteries, and he got all the monks in various monasteries looking up old writings that hadn't been read in hundreds of years. And Europeans said, hey, this is great. These people knew a lot. They had a lot of philosophy. Now, about the art, two of the painters, I want you to remember Da Vinci. These men were not just painters. They were sculptors also. Painters, sculptors, builders, architects, you might call them. These were the greatest. There were others. Da Vinci's most famous painting is the painting of the Last Supper. Let's see, seemed like there's a picture of that. Actually, there is a picture of it. Last Supper. There's one thing wrong with that picture of the Last Supper. Oh yeah, okay. Thank you. These people, in that time, in Roman times, they did not eat sitting at a table. They ate reclined, lying on their stomach, basically, and they would eat with their elbow propped up. And a lot of doctors today will tell you this is actually a more healthy way to eat than our modern way of eating, sitting at a table. But they ate in a reclined position. The table was about like 6 inches off the floor, so they did not eat off the floor, but they ate reclined. And that's when, but Da Vinci apparently did not know that. Mankind had forgotten that. Now, about Da Vinci's painting, there is a story that when Da Vinci started his painting, the first person he wanted to paint was Jesus, so he wanted to be looking at somebody. So he went around the neighborhood and found some really young nobleman, up-and-coming nobleman, and thought, hey, this man's young and looks like he's on his way to wealth. So coaxed him inside and said, here, you pose for me while I paint your picture. He was Jesus. Well, years went by. It came time to paint the last one, to paint Judas. So he went around the slum area, looking at the slums, found a man and thought, hey, this man will fit my description of Judas. Went in and asked the man his name and found out it was the same man whom he had used to paint Jesus many years before. But he asked, well, what happened to you? Oh, well, I fell to drinking, I gambled, I lost all my money, my wife left me, and I wound up here in the slums. Da Vinci used him as his model to paint Judas. Just a little bit of trivia I thought I'd throw in, but one of the most famous paintings come out of the Middle Ages. Again, the word Renaissance has to do with the reawakening, rebirth. The Black Death, the bubonic plague, call it what you will, did a lot to inspire it. When people decided we're not going to succumb to this, we're going to rebuild. In the crisis of the 300s, Europeans had collapsed and fallen, their civilization had come to an end. But in the crisis of the 1300s, Europeans fought back, and they had a setback, but they overcame it. All right. All right, now by way of review. Start off with let's see. half of the test is going to be chapters 12 and 13. All right, know your crusades, at least 4 of them. Actually 5. First, second, third, fourth, and children's. First crusade was the only one that was a military success, but it was not led by kings. Get the government involved, and the government often louses up. Second crusade, led by kings, it flopped. Third crusade was led by kings, and had 2 of the 3 kings stayed with it. The one king drowned, the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor drowned. Philip Augustus turned back, and that left Richard the Lionhearted, and he could not handle Saladin. But Saladin was the one who opposed him. Saladin drove the Crusaders out of Jerusalem. Fourth crusade, that's the one that sacked Constantinople. Children's crusade, that was the one where all the children who participated were killed or enslaved. None of them returned. Know what a nun, monk, hermit. Know this much about them. Nuns were women, monks were men. Nuns live, I don't want to say live, they still do, but nuns live in a convent. Monks live in a monastery. Hermits, they're somewhat out of style, but they live by themselves. The hermit lives by himself for religious reasons. Priest, the word priest means mediator between God and man. Something you must know, Islam does not believe in a priesthood, and a lot of Protestant denominations do not either. Mediator between God and man. All right. Heretic. That's a person who disagrees with the church. Joan of Arc was burned in part for witchcraft, but also in part for heresy. H-E-R-E-T-I-C. Heretic. All right, Inquisition, very infamous Inquisition, where the church would persecute people for heresy, among other things, for having their own private beliefs. And like I said, we had a pope finally who apologized for it, Pope John Paul II, but it has done a lot of damage to Christendom and to the church. Indulgences. All right, anybody remember? I'll ask you, what are indulgences?
When people can pay for their sins.
Pay for forgiveness for sins, or you might say, I'll pay for the privilege of committing a sin that you want to commit. It's no longer practiced. Now, all right. A Christian ceremony was called a sacrament, or the 7 sacraments. It's a Christian ceremony, sacrament of the Lord's Supper, sacrament of matrimony or marriage, sacrament of extreme unction when they think a person's about to die, or if a person already has died, immediately, as soon as they can, they perform what's called it's sometimes called last rites or extreme unction. But the church practices, the Catholic Church has 7 sacraments. Religious ceremony, Christian ceremony. All right, now we're going back to earlier times. Do you know what the word Neolithic means? Neolithic.
Prehistoric.
What's that? New Stone Age. New Stone Age. Paleolithic.
Old Stone.
Old Stone Age. Yeah, Paleolithic, supposing their stone tools were more primitive. Neolithic, their stone tools were better. Then you enter the Bronze Age and finally the Iron Age. Person who seems to know, wait a minute, all right, an expert on religious matters. Now this is more to do with Hinduism than Christianity, but an expert on religious matters is considered a guru. Yeah, guru. They rule by a family. From generation to generation, it's called a dynasty. Yeah, monarchy is, but it's because the word monarchy involves dynasty.
Led by generation.
Yeah, generate from father to son, usually from father to son. But if the father has no sons, they'll pick a near relative, a brother or a cousin, whatever. Dynasty. All right. What is a pariah? Again, this is Hindu.
It's an outcast.
Outcast. Pariah. Outcast. Legalism teaches us that governments should do what? Legalism. That governments should, among other things, legislate morality, enforce rules strictly. Governments should forbid drinking, should forbid smoking, should forbid pornography, should forbid this, should forbid that. I mean, issues I personally think are better off if left up to each individual to deal with rather than the government, because governments that have dealt with them find that they don't make any kind of scientific or technological progress. But legalism, the government should enforce its laws real strictly and make people behave. I mean, to put it in elementary school terms, make people act right. It's legalism. All right. Now, what's the difference? Well, let's put it this way. Myth. A myth is a story that usually involves what? Gods. A legend usually involves heroes. Myths, gods, legend, heroes. Some of these questions you might have seen before.
Myth involved gods and legends involved.
When you pass a story down by word of mouth through the generations, this is frequently referred to as a tradition. Yeah, tradition. A story that hasn't been written down. Maybe somebody will eventually write it down. The story of Eric the Red coming to the New World, that was passed down by word of mouth, and finally somebody wrote it down. For a while it wasn't considered history, but then we found their place where they lived in Nova Scotia, so we now consider that serious history. All right, we get history from primary sources. How do you define a primary source? Say it a little louder. Somebody wrote it down. A person who saw the event wrote it down. A person who lived at that time saw it, wrote about it. That's a primary. Secondary sources, persons who read primary sources and then interpret them, but who live oftentimes either far away from the event or many, sometimes generations after the event. That's secondary. All right. Back to chapter 12, I believe. Eastern Europeans were of what ethnicity?
Caucasian.
Yeah, they were Caucasian, but then again, I'm talking about Eastern Europeans as opposed to other, yes. Slavs, yeah. I mean, Eastern Europeans. Yeah, Western Europeans were Caucasian also. And the people of India were Caucasian. But the Eastern Europeans are generally of a Slavic dynasty, Slavic ethnicity. Now, I've been talking to another part-time teacher who's into anthropology, and he insists that there is only one race, the human race. But ethnicity, that's a little bit different too. Many ethnic groups, but only one race. All right. I took the word race off of all my tests, by the way, after listening to him. Let's see. Where was the first European university located? Algonia. First European university. Then the next one was located where? But actually a third one, I believe. It started in Bologna and went from there to Paris and from there to Oxford. Bologna, Paris, Oxford. Bolgonia. I believe that's right.
I don't think I know.
Huh?
I think it was Bologna.
Bologna.
Something like that. Bologna.
Okay, yeah, okay. Let me see. Well, I may be wrong about the spelling now.
That's fine.
I think I'm wrong about the spelling.
Bologn.
I'm wrong about the spelling. All right.
That's fine.
The monks made some vows. What were their vows?
Poverty,
Poverty,
chastity.
chastity, and obedience. Poverty, chastity, and obedience. All right. Going back some time, a little bit. True, false. Well, actually, this is chapter 12. The Mongolians conquered Russia and held it for 200 years. True or false?
True.
True. Who was the Mongolian leader who partially conquered China? Genghis Khan. Let's see. All right. Now, in Southeast Asia, when we talk about other religion, what did most of them tend to embrace once they came in contact with civilization? Which religion? Buddhism. Before that, their ancestors had been animistic. And my daughter ran into an issue at her college because she couldn't tell why they would embrace Buddhism, and I honestly did not even think about the issue. Here's why I think it was. Buddhism is more egalitarian. And these people in Southeast Asia didn't want a hierarchical society, and they were not hierarchical by nature, so they were more egalitarian. So they would pick Buddhism as a more comfortable religion to choose from, given a choice between Buddhism and Hinduism. As for Confucianism, it did not really try to make converts abroad. They looked on it as being primarily for their own people. What is the primary religion of the Japanese? Shinto. Yeah, I had a pupil this morning tell me the Japanese are not very religious. That's largely true. But Shintoism, which emphasizes cleanliness, flowers, aesthetic beauty, you might say, and particularly the idea that the government can make no mistakes, the emperor is divine.